Welcome to the Chasing Brighter podcast.
You're about to go on a journey of self-discovery as we chase a brighter you. Every single week, we will bring you new episodes that will cover everything from lifestyle and tips to more serious conversations about grief, life, and hardships.
Allow this show to be a reminder to always keep chasing a brighter version of you. Let's get into it.
Wow, Kelly, season 2. I can't believe we have finished a second season of the Chasing Brighter podcast.
Yeah, in some ways, I can't believe we're done with season 2. But when I look back at all of the episodes that we've had, it's hard to even remember. Like, we
I
covered a lot of
know.
ground this season.
Yeah, over 70 episodes this season. And today we were going to go over your favorite episode for season 2. So, Kel, what was your favorite episode season 2?
So I really pushed myself out of my comfort zone on this just because I don't like things that are sad. One of the episodes that I think really stuck with me was our amazing conversation with Dr. Corinne Cherek, who's the founder of Grace from Grief Counseling, and her sharing her story with us. In the month of September, I think we were focused on grief and loss and having conversations and dealing with that. And she shared her own journey of that. And it was just a really, really interesting conversation. I loved hearing what she had to say and just how she came out of that. And then just her spiritual journey was super interesting to me. And I think that was the part that really I loved the most on the conversation.
Yeah, that was a wonderful conversation. I know we've talked about having her back again. I've been talking with her. She is a friend and colleague of mine. I love her so much. I don't remember if I shared on the podcast episode, but I met her at a dinner. We went to a dinner with other clinicians, and I thought she was so amazing. I Googled her and stalked her and found a podcast that she was on. I thought she was so amazing, and then reached out. And then during the pandemic, a few of us had Zoom calls regularly to stay in touch and go over some cases. And you just meet somebody, you just love their energy. I just love her
Yes,
energy.
I
I think
love her
she
energy.
shines light and love. And she's a beautiful person who has gone through the loss of her daughter and her grandchild. And she's come away with that. And she has such an incredible skill as a clinician.
Yeah. And we've had quite a few counselors on as well,
Mhm.
or people who are in that field. And
Right.
I think it was a really tough decision in a lot of ways because we had some amazing conversations with some amazing people. This is
Yeah.
definitely one that stuck with me.
Yeah. So enjoy an encore of our interview with Dr. Corinne Cherek.
It's a joy to be here. Thank you.
There has been so much death happening around us, a lot of loss, a lot of grief, and it can be really uncomfortable for a lot of us to talk about that. And so we're happy to have you here as an expert guiding us through that. So we'd love to hear about your personal journey.
Okay. As you said, I was I was healed of cancer in 1996. And within a couple of years, what had already been gifts I had my whole life, but they were pretty much squashed down. They came out like on steroids. So a friend of mine had died from my meditation group, Matthew, and he started showing up in my meditations every morning. And then eventually he started bringing me people. He started bringing people through, and I didn't know what was happening. I actually thought I was possessed and went to a psychologist, Dr. Raymond Moody, who was the head of our consciousness department at UNLV. And he's like, "You've been gifted. There's nothing wrong with you. You need to get a license and hang a shingle because you've been gifted." So that's what I did. It took me 2 years to get licensed because a lot of people don't want a spiritual medium in their strip mall because then they can't have alcohol. They think you're going to create a church and then they're afraid because of that. But anyway, I was working as a medium, probably 2000 to 2002. And then unexpectedly, my daughter was pregnant and she was infected with a virus. And my 10-day-old granddaughter died within 6 days of each other. And my whole life turned upside down. And I thought I understood grief before this. I thought I had lost best friends. I had lost relatives. I had been around grief. I was a hospice volunteer. I had been so much around it, and nothing had prepared me for what was about to happen, even being a medium. What I will say is, thank God I was a medium for those 2 years, because what I saw in my practice, I know that we don't die. I believe with all my heart that there's life after death, there's life before death. And even though people would say, you were a medium, couldn't you just talk to her? No, it's not like you dial up on the phone. You don't, it doesn't work that way. And grief drops us down our vibration, no matter where you are. When someone's grieving, Dr. David Hawkins has a visual of a pyramid of our emotions. And if you don't have it, I'll send it to you. But grief is at the very bottom. I think the only thing below it is shame and one more, because it just brings us down. The physical body has to grieve, as well as the emotional, spiritual, psychological, all aspects of us are grieving. So actually, when the girls were in the hospital, I thought she was a Reiki practitioner. I'm a Reiki master as well. I thought because I was healed of cancer, this was her 911. This was her big scare. And she was going to have this big miracle happen like I did. And then her whole life changed. So I kept praying for divine healing and divine timing for both of them. When my granddaughter died first in my arms, she was my very first actual live death. And it was the most beautiful experience of my life outside of birthing my daughter. But because she was a baby and because we took her off life support and she simply just went to sleep, it was just like watching her go to sleep forever. And we were surrounded with people who were singing and praying with us. Everybody was trying to help. But anyway, my daughter was in a coma in a different hospital when Drew died in my arms. So we went to Jess's hospital where she was at, and her whole room was lit up. And I was in shock, I know, and Grace, but I kept thinking, why do they have more lights on today? It didn't occur to me that Drew and her entourage were there saying goodbye to her mother. Yeah. And I would find that out later from a psychic, but I didn't know that at the time. But anyway, they die. And of course, I go into shock and grief, which people will say, oh, I'm not in shock. I know that they've died. No, we're in shock. Our whole being is assaulted, I think, when people die, depending on the severity of the loss and the relationship and how they died. It can be different for people, but the loss of a child, I don't know anybody who isn't devastated.
I also think we don't, in America, I only know American society, but we don't allow space for that. You know what I mean? I know if someone dies, your work is, it has to be a parent or your spouse, the end, and then you need to be back at work. You can have 48 hours to grieve, and then you need to get back to it. And there's not like space for it.
My husband gave me a month. He said, I was working as a medium. Like, you'll be better in a month. We just got married the week they died on top of it. That's another conversation for another day. But it was like, I was at the top of my game. I was starting to speak. I was writing a book, everything. I was getting remarried for the first time since her dad died. We were divorced, but her dad died many moons ago. And so she was having a baby. Like, this was the time of our life. And it all came crashing down all at the same time. And what I thought was, I never got mad at God, and I never got mad at my daughter. Now, my daughter, I had a few words for her, but not anger. Like, why did you leave me? I knew when her daughter died, her dad died when she was 7. Her baby girl dies. I know I'm out. I know she's going to go. There's no doubt in my mind. And she told me the December before at Christmas, she said, Mom, I told God, I don't want to be here another year by myself. She wanted a partner so bad. And the baby daddy wasn't going to marry her. And so she was like, she was having the baby and she was excited to have her. And there's a whole nother conversation about that too. There were a lot of dreams and premonitions, not only that she had, I had, and her friends had. I dreamt her watch broke. Didn't occur to me her time was up. Her friend Letty dreamt that she hit the jackpot in August. And so she said, Mom, Letty said, I'm going to hit the jackpot. Like, it's bigger than winning the lottery and having Drew, my granddaughter, all at the same time. She said, what would that be? And I said, that would be having all the love in the world come to you. Drew was born August 9th. Funny, we're doing this August 1st anyway. She was born August 9th. Jess was put in ICU August 10th. Drew died August 19th. I got married August 24th, and Jess died August 25th. And her dad died August 29th. So it's like August is our month. And it all happened. And so we'll fast forward a little bit. So grief took over. I was a hot mess. Of course, I sought out psychics and mediums because I wanted to hear anything. I could hear her once in a while, like on the plane coming home from, we did two memorials, one here in Vegas and then one in Omaha, where we're from. When we did the memorial in Omaha, I was due to fly home on 9/11. I'm like, oh, hell no. I'm not, this was a year late. This was a year later. So I changed it to the 10th and I'm on the plane and there's nobody on the plane and I'm laying down because it's late at night and I'm trying to take a nap. And I'm talking to my daughter and she goes, Mom, I'm right here. You of all people know that. And I go, yes, but I can't feel you. And so she was there, but I couldn't breathe her in. Anyway, grief took its toll. And I'm going to say this right now. This might help somebody else. I am not telling people how to grieve and what to do. I later learned that I had a sugar addiction and I had it my whole life. And I think it numbed and dulled and kept me separate from spirit. And so I gained weight grieving, but I also couldn't hear as easily because I wasn't using sugar before they died. I was off sugar. And so I was using it to cope. Like her favorite dessert was cheesecake, factory cheesecake. And her favorite food was pizza. So guess what I ate for 6 months? All the pizza. So I was a mess. I gained a bunch of weight. But anyway, I do think that people need to find their own coping mechanisms. I didn't stop meditating, but I couldn't get very far. And it overwhelmed me. Plus, I had a full house to take care of. I had to let go of a nursery. I had so many things to do. And I think that's the blessing of grieving. And I say this as hard as it is, we're distracted with all the to-dos, closing day, all those things we have to do. If you have legal issues, it's overwhelming. We had a trust, there's all these things you have to take care of. And then it stirs up her dad dying. It just stirs everything up. And you have enough to deal with just the loss. I want to go back to what you said, because this is how I feel, especially since COVID. When COVID hit, I felt, oh my gosh, this is why I stayed, because I saw the gifts that were coming from it. But the world, we're on the Titanic. We hit the iceberg. Everybody has to get in their own life raft and find their own GPS. God-powered steering, God-powered sight, whatever you want to call it. So any of us, if we haven't done our work, we had this golden opportunity, whatever bubbled up, to start, look at counseling. It's taking off like crazy. Of course, with the depth, so is mediumship and spirituality and all of that. But if we really are in an ascension process, which is what my metaphysical community believes, then we have to start the transformation. You have the breakdown to have the breakthrough. When someone dies in anyone's life, those ripples usually go out thousands of places between friends, family, colleagues. When I say thousands, because each of those people that are affected, each of their people are affected. It just keeps going out like the ripples in the tide in the ocean. And when I look at it now, you mentioned a minute ago how things are happening. Grief was so misunderstood. I think COVID has given us an ideal time to focus on grief. It's exploding with people now interested. Dr. Ellen Wolfeld's been around for a long time. He has a wonderful Center for Transitions in Colorado, who I did train with him a little bit. But I feel, and this is where I'll go back to my story. When the girls died, I couldn't work. I don't think I even tried to work as a medium after they died once. I went to a counselor and she said, absolutely not. And she was metaphysical and spiritual. She's like, there's no way I want you tethering between the other side and this side. And she was right. I probably wouldn't have come back if I would have had a choice. And I don't mean that I wanted to kill myself or not live. I wanted to be with them.
Yeah.
I wanted to be with them. So I stopped that and actually created a foundation in their memory based on what they died from. And so that was my distraction. But it took years of me grieving, and I studied grief. I went to Germany and studied the Holocaust. I went to France and studied the French Revolution, studied the Civil War. Viktor Frankl is one of my favorite authors, Man's Search for Meaning. I wanted to know people who suffered like I felt I was suffering. I really thought I knew grief. I had no idea. There was nothing that prepared me for what I was going through. So I just kept reading. I have hundreds of books on grief and life after death and do we really die and where do we go and what happened? And all of that was somewhat comforting and kept me semi-grounded, but what really transformed, one of my new best friends, she lost a daughter as well. We became friends and got involved with the Compassionate Friends. And there's wonderful groups out there for people who are grieving children. Compassionate Friends is for parents and grandparents that have, and siblings that have
Mm.
lost a family member. And then another person I met along the journey, Susan Whitmore, she has Grief Haven in California. And these are online groups where there's chat rooms. People need support. Therapy's great. All the modalities you can do. I did therapy, Reiki, healing touch, chiropractic, you name it. Holistic, functional medicine, Chinese medicine, whatever. I didn't take any drugs. I didn't want to. I wanted to go as natural as possible.
Mhm.
To my healing from cancer, I'm gluten intolerant. I don't do gluten, sugar, flour, alcohol, none of that anymore. And that's what I want to fast forward to. I spent 14 years studying, and during that time, I became a chaplain. And that program, it ended up taking me 3 or 4 years because one of the programs fell apart and a new one was created. And I went with the World Spiritual Health Organization. But I started that process probably in '08 or '09, and then finished in 2012, right about the time my dad died. But that program was so wonderful because the chaplain program was at the hospital my granddaughter died in. And when I went for the interview, I couldn't stop crying. And I thought they were going to fight, say, we can't have you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Instead, they said, your tears are welcome here. And I thought, you're going to let me come here? And they said, we promise you, we won't turn you loose if we don't think you're ready. So I met with the first chaplain, and that's what he said. Then I met with the supervisor. Um, and he said, I was crying again. And he said, look, I'm okay that your heart is broken. At least it's open.
Yeah.
I knew I was in the right place when he said
Mhm.
that. It's Chaplain Mark Allison. He's the founder of World Spiritual Health Organization. So I was in the program for a couple of years, and we had to do verbatims. And for anybody who knows anything about master level education, you have to get in there and do your own work. We need to know where the transference and countertransference is going on. What's going on here? Where do you need to work on yourself? And so it was great because my very first solo was a fetal demise, which is when a baby dies in the same hospital my granddaughter died in, almost the same, not the same virus, but
Mhm.
similar circumstances. And I remember walking in the bathroom and saying, all right, God, if you really think I'm ready, you're going to have to help me because I can't let my personal feelings
Mhm.
show up here. And I walked in that room and spirit took over and I aced it. It was a home run. I was able to support her. She hadn't even seen her baby yet. And I don't know why. I don't remember what the circumstances were, but I got a hold of the people I needed to get a hold of. And I said, this young lady needs to see her baby before she goes home, and stayed with her while she held her. Everything I went through myself. And then so she was able to go home in peace. And when I say in peace, at least so she could start her grieving process. All the things I had went through were used so beautifully to help other people. And the person who encouraged me to be a chaplain is my best friend, Lisa. She's a ICU nurse, or she was. Now she's a professor. But she said to me, she goes, Corinne, you do this naturally. Why don't you go get board certified? Because hospice always threatens they're going to require that. But go get the credentials and go through the training so you can work out a lot more of your own issues and then go. So I worked in hospice for 5 years. So I
Wow.
got my master's and then worked in hospice for 5 years. And this is where it really changed. So I thought, this is great. I did this. I wanted to make peace with death. I probably did, I don't know how many funerals and celebrations of life. And because I had created my daughter and granddaughter celebration of life, it is a person's last celebration. Usually it's the last party or gathering you're going to have for them.
Mhm.
I remember thinking whenever I would do something for people, I would get to know the family and say, I would interview them and put something together so people who came left knowing more than they knew before they walked in, even if it was family. So I prided myself in honoring that person's life and their soul. And I did this. I did for them what I would do for my own family, maybe not to the whole extent, but as much as I could. So I did that for 5 years. And then I went to work for a treatment center as the chaplain to provide spiritual counseling. And this is going to lead to what we're going to talk about as well. I work with so many young people, and they're so sensitive and they have a really hard time being on this planet. It's so convoluted and chaotic. and their little indigos or their little crystal and rainbow children just trying to find a way to navigate through this life. And they end up on drugs or addicted to something, and they end up dying because of the fentanyl or something, or they overdose. And I can't tell you how many people I worked with that I would talk to them about spirituality, and they were oozing for it. We all know a lot of people are not real thrilled with organized religion today. And it's not that religion isn't great and the sacred texts have their purpose. It's what's happened. It's the greed. It's the way it's been used to control and all of that. So we're on this planet Earth, and we're like, I don't like this. I don't like this. Where do we go? Everything's breaking down. It's themes. It feels like. So instead of panicking, I encourage them to go inside and develop their own higher power. If they've got a God, if they have a belief system. Some people are atheists, and that's fine. They believe in love. Love's a higher power. As long as the power is greater than them, they've got something to hold on to. When we're surrendering our addiction, and I'll speak for myself as a recovering addict, it has to be bigger than us. I'm not big enough to, I think I can control things. Obviously I couldn't, or I wouldn't have spent 60 years addicted. What happened was I was working at the treatment center, and a friend called me and said, hey, I need your help. My minor is in HR management, and he had a casino and a gentleman's club and 2 casinos downtown. And he said, would you come help me hire another HR manager? And I said, I did it before. And I said, sure, I'll come back and help you, because I could use the money, and I wanted to help him. He's my friend. I was at this place, and I knew we were closing. He sold the place, and I was going to have to lay off these 200 people. And I'm starting to eat, and I can't stop. I can't get enough sugar to numb. I don't want to lay off 200 people. I tell these people, I'm so sorry, you don't have a job come June 30th or whatever it was. And I thought, here I am on this spiritual path, and I think I'm getting my act together. Not quite at acceptance with the girls' deaths yet, but I'm on my way. My insides felt just like their outsides looked. What's the difference? What's going on here? And I thought, what is wrong with me? And I prayed and asked God for a new 12-step program or study group or something to help me, because I looked at Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, all these different 12-step programs, but I never saw myself as a food addict. And I went to a food addiction program. And again, another conversation for another day. But I went off flour, sugar, and alcohol July 4th of 2016. And my life hasn't been the same since. Within 30 days, the clarity came, the flashes came, revelations came. I couldn't believe what was happening to me. And within a year, my grief was healed. My heart was healed. I have no more grief. That doesn't mean I don't get tears once in a while if I see their things, but I have no missing, no aching heart. I can walk through Hallmark now and see a card that says mother, daughter, granddaughter. I don't get the dagger anymore.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of healing work. Please don't let me act like I didn't. I've done a lot of healing work with a lot of healers, but it came to fruition when I got clean.
And was that, like you were saying, like a 14 years or what?
I went 14 years of becoming a chaplain and all those other things. I was pretty good, Jessica. What I would say was August, I would take 3 weeks off. August was I got to protect myself as much as I can, because I would still go down the rabbit hole, and that rabbit hole hurt. That hole in my heart was so big, and all that flour, sugar, and alcohol wasn't going to fix it. And my alcohol wasn't drinks. It was homeopathic remedies, rescue remedy. For people who aren't addicted, it's great because it just takes the edge off your grief or your emotions. And I was using it every day, not thinking I was addicted, thinking I needed it. Who wouldn't need it in my circumstances is how I thought. I justified it. So once I was off everything and my body was clean, when I'd meditate, so my granddaughter came to me. This was so beautiful. She came to me like the baby in my arms, so I would know it was her. And then she flashed into this goddess with this beautiful golden hair to let me know who I really am now. My daughter came to me and she swirled around and she showed me what she looked like. But then she too went into her higher self is what I would call it. And then eventually I did some hypnosis and they came into me and they haven't left. So now we are truly one. And that's where, to me, the wholeness, like when I look at recovery and grieving, everything I think we do is recovery. We're recovering the fragmented parts of ourself that we lost along the way in this lifetime, whether it's from childhood or adulthood, it doesn't matter. If something happened when we're a child, if we're wounded or abused, or somebody dies, or we're in an accident, or we see an accident, there's all kinds of ways to pick up wounds, right? We can get them from all different places. We spend the rest of our life kind of great. We from 18 on, once we become an adult, it's our responsibility to address whatever we need to and go forwards. To me, that's what recovery is. You don't have to be in 12-step recovery, but recovery of the soul is what can I work on today? If something comes up or if you get triggered by somebody, that's a golden opportunity. It's not, nothing's wrong and no one's bad. It's,
Yeah.
oh, I'm getting a rub. I'm sad about. And
Well, and I
I
want to
think
go,
that's
just hearing your story is amazing, Corinne. And what I'm inspired by is just you seem to be always looking for answers in some way and always seeking different ways and being open, right, to different ways of learning too. Do you feel like if you look at even going back to your childhood, like how you grew up and what even got you to think about that? Because I think that's one of the things that a lot of people who struggle with grief, they can't get themselves out of it, right? They can't figure out how to help themselves.
so what I would say, I've done a lot of work. And this is why I like doing the work. When my mom was pregnant with me, her favorite uncle was dying of cancer. I had grief in utero.
Mhm.
So when I was born, she couldn't nurse me. Then her uncle died. And when she told me the story, I thought, then I ended up with cancer 3 times and I have grief my whole life. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It was destiny to me. And so I was raised Catholic. That has a whole nother conversation about it.
Mhm.
But from the time I was born, so I think Uncle Johnny died a few days after I was born. I know that my great grandmother, my maternal great grandmother, she died, and then my another grandmother, they died after I was born. One died of grief. Her husband died when he was 40, and then her 23-year-old, I think, daughter died back when they had like rheumatic fever. She
Mhm.
died adult of complications. And then the other grandmother died of cervical cancer. I was healed of cervical cancer. Now I've been healed of grief. I don't think it's any
Mhm.
coincidence that all that happened.
Well,
So we'll get into that another time, but generational trauma or healing the
mhm.
ancestral line, all of that happened for me too. But Kelly, to answer your question, I do use astrology. I'm not an astrologer, but I've studied astrology a little bit. I think some of us come in with an angel on our shoulder, or we come in with a guide. We all come in with angels, I
Mhm.
think. I do think some of us have that optimism. Like I was a cheerleader in high school. Obviously, I'm a good cheerleader. Like I love to support people, but that was innate. That came with me. And to answer your question, I was in a very tumultuous family. I love my parents very much, but abuse, addiction, all of that existed. And I think that not only did I develop like dyslexia and some learning disabilities, that's how you cope with the good people are bad. What am I supposed to do with that? These are the people who love me. Why am I feeling so unloved?
Mhm.
We can develop different coping mechanisms that
Mhm.
later look like a disorder. But if we treat it, all those defects become assets.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about 12-step recovery, because there's all these steps you can go through with a sponsor on your own. I'm all for counseling. Obviously, I'm a counselor, but there's so much work to do. People couldn't afford to come every day. Now I know why some people did psychoanalysis every day for an hour. They needed it. They needed that kind of support. We have it in we have a lot of podcasts and groups and support groups now that can help people, because there is a lot of work to do if you've got any kind of addictive, abusive, or grief riddled background. It's a
Mhm.
lot to abandonment, all the issues that come up when people die, or that can come up when people
Mhm.
die. So we cope with those. I'm trying to think of, so I was divorced when Jess's dad was in a horrible fire, and he lived 9 months in intensive care. So I think the very first counseling I did was either with her for that, or no, when we got divorced. I knew I needed help. It was bigger than me. So I did go to 12, like Al-Anon and AA and all those kind of programs to try to understand, because he was an alcoholic, to try to understand what that was about. because he was not in recovery. But our real counseling began when Jess's dad died, and she had a wonderful therapist in Omaha that was just outstanding. And you learned the anger. My daughter was so angry and at her dad, not at her dad, at God. How could you take my daddy? So that's when the quest probably really took off. Was I couldn't just read a book now. I needed somebody professionally to help me and guide me.
I
Yeah.
think
So
it's I don't want to say like an abyss, but almost like unlimited, because what I'm hearing you say is you did all this work and then this trauma happens and you lose your daughter and granddaughter, and then 14 more years of work and still doing the work. And I love hearing you. I don't know if you got that about your mom being pregnant from hypnotherapy. I did hypnotherapy. I did a prenatal regression, and it opened my eyes up to a lot of stuff that was happening while my mom was pregnant with me and why I am the way I am. And you talk about we looked like before I came to the realm, and I had just spiritual guides everywhere, very similar to your story. I love all that. But then then there's still more to do. And so I love, like Kelly saying, your curiosity, open-mindedness, always looking. And then it's, oh, there's still work to do. There's still work to do. And it's like I told Kelly, I did all of this work. And then people are like, you're struggling with worthlessness, Jess. I'm like, damn it. No, I was just working on this. And now I've got to work on this. And it's just coming on what we need to work on. So it sounds like also with grief, it just, brings up more layers of things we need to continue exploring and working on.
And so I'm going to say this because I think we work till the day we die. And I say this because if we're human beings and we barely use 7% of our brain, if we want to become fully human, wouldn't we have a better work to do to find out what's there? So to me, meditation, what we're talking about is self-actualization, is the process of being authentic and transparent. That's very scary. In 2016, when I got clean, I was probably 40, almost 50 pounds overweight. All that weight was packed with feelings and issues I stuffed down and buried. Where was that going to go? If I would implode, if I would just say, okay, get rid of all of it at once. So you unravel the onion or you unpack it, whatever word you want to. And that's why seminars I did rebirthing actually, Jess, to answer your question. I did rebirthing years ago where you breathe, it's all this breath work. And then I could smell the ether coming out of me. The last time I had ether was, I think when I had my tonsils out when I was 12 years old or something. I love processes we have between hypnotherapy, rebirthing, all the healing modalities, sound baths. We have so many things to support us today. Yes. And we're human beings. I know people who have lost their children who claim they never lose connection. They don't grieve. They don't go into grief. They stay connected or they hear their children. I don't know if they are wired differently and have a different spiritual path, because I'm older and I think of my generation. I don't know anybody who didn't go through the traditional grief process, meaning all the phases and stages of grief. And they're hellacious. They can be very painful. But if you get to acceptance, that's when the joy comes. It's like people will say to me, you do miss your daughter. No, I don't, because she's with me every day. I don't miss her. She's where she's supposed to be, where her soul is. I'm right here, but the essence of her that existed in this lifetime is with me. I don't need to, don't get me wrong. I have a picture up. I acknowledge their birthdays. I acknowledge them as they live, but her picture used to be in every room in my house years ago. Not necessary anymore. I don't need the props today because I know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I want to tell you what happened, because I did not do this by myself. So there's a wonderful woman here. Her name is Vicki Smith, and she has Healing Touch. And I've known her for years. We used to do sweat lodges together years ago. And after I got clean, the guy that I was working for, helping him sell his businesses, he gifted me several sessions with her And I thought, oh, this is great. So I went to see her, and this was 2019 when I was finishing my PhD. And I thought, okay, I want to start dating now. I'm done with school. I want to get my act together. So she was balancing my chakras. I'm laying on her massage table. And all of a sudden, I feel like I'm levitating. Vinny, I feel like I'm levitating. And she says nothing. And then Jess and Drew appear. And I'm like, Jess and Drew are here. She says nothing. And they want to walk into me. And I'm like, what? And then I get in that moment, it's a oneness experience. And of course I say yes, it's my daughter and granddaughter. So they walk into me, and then 100 more people show up. My first husband, my father, my best friend that died. And I'm like, I'm a little shocked. And I'm like, okay. I had to make sure that I was forgiven and they were forgiven, because there were a few people we had some hits there. 100 people came in, and then my image of Christ consciousness showed up, my image of Christ. And he said, focus on the ascension, not the crucifixion, and relinquish all aspects of the Savior complex. And he walked in, and I have not been the same since. Now, that was on top of the grief was healed, but this is a whole nother layer of spirituality.
I'm going to go back to this ascension. And I know you talked about it before. And to you, I guess I'm wondering if you've interpreted that, or because I think about what you're talking about when you say when you're in grief, you're at a lower vibrational level, right? So you're not going to be able to tap into what you can at a higher vibrational pattern. And then I know you and we know Janet Hanley, a Reiki healer. And so she talks about us, I don't know, elevating humanity. Is that what you're hearing when you hear about like ascension? Because Janet keeps talking about the higher vibration, younger kids being born, and they're already at this higher level
and coming in higher.
And that we're trying to, I think about it, evolving humanity or bringing us to a higher level, or what do you think of when you think about that ascension, I suppose, my question.
Exactly. So we are in the age of Aquarius, according to the astrologers, and that started a few years ago. 2012 was a huge convergence. 2012 was a life-changing year for all of us. And that we'll have to research to talk about it more authentically.
Right.
But the age of Aquarius is more recent. And what I'm going to say is that when I look at this from my whole life now, because I have a bird's eye view of at least all that I've acquired coming forward.
Yeah.
And the ascension process to me is when the story we were told when Christ died, whatever happened, I'm not 100% sure, but let's just assume what we were told is true. He ascended. That what he taught us was unconditional love and how to ascend. Other people were crucified. I'm not taking away from the meaning of the crucifixion. I'm not touching that. It's sacred. I'm not touching that. But what he said was, love your neighbor as yourself. And then when he went to ascend, it was like he was just lifted up. So I do believe that we will have a day, and I don't know if I'll see it or you'll see it, but I do believe that humanity will see a day when people don't die, they'll ascend. They'll be able to go up. We won't have to go through the death process. Not positive, but that's what I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I'm going to say to you, and I'm going to share a story because this is so beautiful. So there's a man named Lee Carroll who wrote a book, Indigo Children. He channels an entity called Cryon, Kryon. One year I was working with another chaplain. He had lost a granddaughter and a son, and they were working in Europe, and I was going to go replace them. So we were getting to know each other. But when I heard his son died, I was crying and praying for him. And I was like, please, God, give me something to listen to, because at that time I wasn't healed yet. And every time I heard somebody lost a child, I knew what they were possibly going to go through. And I'm like, no, not another one. We don't want any more people in our club.
Yeah.
And I listened to this podcast that night, and I have it, and I'll send it to you if you want it. But it's called The Great Split. And he says, this is the Cryon entity speaking through Lee Carroll. And he says, I've looked into the eyes of a soul who knew potentially before it was born that it had the potential to die as a child. And you would ask, why would a soul do this? And he was talking as much about miscarriages and possibly abortions, because he was talking about babies that died. But it applies to anybody. But He said, when a child dies, it takes the family's emotions to zero. They cry out in anger, they cry out in other things, but they always cry out in sorrow. And he said, but then if they choose, they can end up bringing more light to the planet than they would have had that soul not said yes. And when I heard this, I was bawling, just sobbing. And I thought, oh my God, did my girls sign up for this? For our family? So we would have this horrific breakdown. So any of us who chose to could go inside and find our true higher self and connect to source and be able to bring light to this planet. That's what happened. So to me,
I hear you saying like finding meaning and purpose in the
finding
loss.
purpose, meaning. I just flew home from a memorial for my cousin's husband, and I was on the plane and I wasn't talking to anybody. And the woman sitting next to me, I had noticed her feet in the bathroom, and I noticed her feet for whatever reason. She ends up talking to me for a second. This is how God works. This is how my life works. This is going to tie together. She starts talking to me, and I don't know what she said. We both lost our only daughters. We both went through hellacious experiences, years of issues before they died, whether it was mental, physical, or spiritual. We both were raised Catholic. She became a hypnotherapist after she healed enough, and she worked with children in in hospice. We were just sitting there with tears streaming because we were
Wow.
kindred souls. Never met her before. I will stay connected to her. I wish she were still in practice. I would have a lot of people to send her. As people who lose a child, they want to go to somebody who understands. And there are therapists and counselors and psychologists and doctors who have been through the experience. Not all have the same experience, but not all want to do that. And so I'm going to full circle this. I chose to do the work I'm doing now, especially after I healed, because I want a safe place for people to come. I want to be able to acknowledge. People want to be heard. They want to feel acknowledged. Even husbands who are grieving a child with their wife. Grief is like a hot potato. Nobody wants to touch it. Can we just move on? We'll come for counseling for a little bit. Can we go on? It does not work that way, no matter what the loss is, especially the loss of a child.
As someone who specializes in helping people, helping guide people through the grief process, are there, I guess I hesitate to say the word tips, but are there things that you have found helpful to be a catalyst to encourage people to get there and
get started?
Purpose?
The first thing that I'm going to say for anybody who's listening, whether you're a counselor, a friend, a family member, a colleague, bystander, listen to people and please stop telling people how they feel. I might have an idea how someone feels who's lost a child, but I have no idea how they really feel because all of our backgrounds are different. How we got here, what came here. Listening to people is so important. Then they're going to tell you who they are. They're going to tell you what they need if you talk and listen long enough. And they're going to hear themselves. And in all of that is where those little, you mine the gems, you mine the emotional emeralds, you mine the spiritual sapphires. That's what we learn in chaplain school. You look for whatever it is that's going to help them see what they need to see. We're mirrors for people as far as I'm concerned. I walk beside my clients. I'm not ahead of them. I'm not behind them. I walk beside them. If they got to go backwards, we take a step back. They ready to go forward, we go forward. We do it together. There's no, they need to be here. Now, if somebody's stuck, I refer them out. If they need some other kind of help, if they need treatment, if they need drug and alcohol, if they need trauma. So many people have unresolved trauma. And I'll say this, if I told you how many times a client comes in and they'll tell me I'm here because my child died, but oh, by the way, I was molested as a child, and they've never unpacked that. Where do we start? We start where the fire's the hottest. You start where the fire's the hottest. You get that somewhat settled down and then see how it goes. So you know this, Jessica, it's a juggling act. It's what's most important, what's Where's the hottest fire? And then go from there. So most people want to have something to look forward to. The parents who lose an only child like I did, that was really hard. So how I say to them, plan a trip, uh, connect with a friend. Looking forward doesn't have to be big, going back to college. It doesn't have to be
Right.
huge.
Yeah.
Start small. Start small with something that inspires you. Reconnect with nature. One of the things I did when I was studying Greek was I did the Camino. Do you know that? Do you know The Way, the movie The Way with Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez, where they go from Spain to Portugal or France to Portugal and you stay in these hostels and you walk this path and you end up in a cathedral?
Sounds really familiar. Yeah.
So I highly recommend people watch it. And it does address grief, can clearly address. There are so many things. It's a pilgrimage. There's so many things people can do. And I'll say this because I did Spain to Portugal. So I was able to go to Fatima first. And having been raised Catholic, even though I don't practice today, all of those things are important to me.
Yeah.
So we went to Fatima and I had a life-changing experience there. We were going through the churches in Portugal, and there was one church with Mary with a statue with a dagger in her heart. And there's a scripture that goes with it. And I stood there and I almost fainted because I knew in that moment, she knew how I felt.
Wow.
Yeah. I had to walk out and take a breath. And then I walked back in and I'm like, oh my God, she knows how I feel. I felt so connected to Mary, which is my middle name, my baptism name actually, but I felt so connected to her. And then it hit me. God knows how I feel. Even if God doesn't feel like humans feel, God let, according to the story, his own son die for us, right? So I use that with my clients a lot. You are not alone, because they'll say, where was God? God was right there. And if he played favorites, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If he'd have saved his son, if he'd have not had his son die for us, if that story's true, which I do believe, then we wouldn't be here. Some people who are Christian and believe that helps them because all of a sudden, whoa. And I'll say, your son or your daughter was chosen for their path. Find out what that is. What can you glean and learn from what your child died from or what they lived through? What is the lesson here? Where's the gifts? People go, gifts? He died. Yeah, there's gifts in death everywhere.
I also think people who have a belief system about death and dying oftentimes do better. They have something to hold on to. I see a lot of people who come in with fear, like fear of death, fear of someone dying, a lot of fear about that. And we talk about, what are your beliefs about that? I don't know. I don't have any beliefs about that. And this is an opportunity for you to, like when you say look inward and to identify what that looks like for you and create that on something, I guess I want to say that healing and comforting, that's what I'm looking for.
When I had cancer, before the healing of cancer, I wasn't afraid of death. I was afraid of dying in pain. It was the dying, having to say goodbye and all of that and leaving my child who already lost her father. I didn't have life-threatening cancer, but I didn't know that when first I had melanoma. When you first diagnose, you don't know.
Sure.
Until they do all the testing. After my healing from cancer, I had a dream and the governor said, get involved with hospice. I didn't even know who the governor of Nevada was, but he told me to get involved with hospice. Hospice training taught me how to live, not how to die. It taught me how to live in the moment to the best of my ability at that time. And what I'll say to you there is I find more people, and this is what I would say, we do want to talk about suicide. People will come to me and say, I'm suicidal. Do you have a plan? No. Do you just not want to be here? Yes. A lot of people don't want to be here. It's so painful. That is not suicidal ideation. That is uncomfortability. That is why we seek that anesthesia, drug, alcohol, food, shopping, sex, whatever we're looking for to fill that hole. It's the uncomfortability. My understanding, the antidote to addiction is identify, express, and feel your feelings. If we could learn to sit, do you know in other countries when people are grieving, they gather and they wail they let the mother or the people, just like you let a sound out to birth a child, you let a sound out to grieve a child. There's all kinds of
We don't
practices.
want to be uncomfortable.
Of course not.
And so
And we
I
don't want to
love, I don't know, I read a book last year and it was like, we think we need to be comfortable all the time. And sometimes we're just uncomfortable.
Yeah,
that
learning
was
to be
like
uncomfortable,
mind
yeah.
blowing for me.
Yeah.
And it's like, and what other people are doing and saying is about them. So when they want you to get over the grief, it's about them being uncomfortable that you haven't moved on.
I will end on this. When Jess died in August and she visited her cousin and her best friend within days, probably the next day of dying. But they were her cousin that wasn't so close to her, and he loved her dearly, but they weren't super, super close. But she went to him because he could hear her. But then a couple months later, she went to an old boyfriend and they had been through something together. They were pregnant and they decided not to have the baby. And she didn't want to do that, but she did. She carried out an abortion. And she came to him and she said, look, because she had broken up with him the week he was going to propose. And she said, I am so sorry I hurt you. But after we terminated the pregnancy, I just couldn't get over it. And she said, but I had to die young and I had to die in childbirth. So if we had that baby, you would have been the husband and father, and I would have still died. Now, he was Pentecostal. He didn't believe in this stuff. And he called me months later and said, Mom, I got to tell you something. And when he told me, I'm like, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you send her to me? Once she said that, it didn't take all my sting away, but she kept telling us it was her destiny. Why did I keep beating myself up going, if only I went to counseling one more time, if only I got one more specialist. That's a natural part of grief to think, because we don't want to feel we don't have some control or
Absolutely.
but we do not have control over anything. We think we do.
I still struggle with that. I know I'm trying to live in the moment and the now, but I sometimes get clicked back over to, oh yeah, I have control.
Not really. We wish we did. We do.
Absolutely.
Honestly, that's too big of a responsibility. It's a big responsibility to bring him in.
Oh, it's peaceful to let go. To me, it's a much easier to live in the flow and live in the moment than it is to try to think I have any kind of control. And I think about that saying, when people say, Jesus, take the wheel, that's what I think of. Like, what you're talking about. It's like, oh, okay, here you go. I'm going to sit in the passenger seat, which is difficult to do. But if we can get there, peaceful and
very difficult in our society. Very difficult.
This was so incredible. I'm so glad that you took the time to meet with us.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
And this is the beginning of a whole new chapter.
Yeah.
So your timing and inviting me is lining up with my timing of coming forward. Going forward is the word. And I thank you. This is beyond sacred to me.
Thanks for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe so you can hear our latest episodes as soon as they drop.